All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to yet another episode of the Facts Over Feelings podcast. I'm back here with my co-host Trevor Kaufman again for podcast number 29, and we had even more things happen this past week in the world of sports with the NBA kicking off training camp. I believe today, Trevor, on Tuesday, December 1st, and free agency finishing up, and the NFL having a full slate of games. We have a lot to talk about, but to start off, I want to talk about the NBA. And more specifically, I want to talk about a specific team in the Golden State Warriors. Tragically, they had a future Hall of Famer, Klay Thompson, or one of the best shooters to ever live. Klay Thompson tears his Achilles this past week, and it's going to significantly hamper them, this upcoming season, obviously. And Trevor, I wanted to ask you, what are your expectations for this team, particularly with the addition of Kelly Oubre, after Klay Thompson tore his Achilles?
Just to talk about the addition of Kelly Oubre, I absolutely love it for the Golden State Warriors. You're not going to fully fill Klay Thompson's shoes, but Kelly Oubre showed last year in Phoenix what he can be, and he's a guy that can give you 18 to 20 points a night of consistent offense. And he, in my opinion, is an above-average defender, and that's what Klay Thompson is in a nutshell: an elite shooter and an elite defender. And my expectations for the Warriors went down a little bit because, again, losing Klay is tough. But I still think this is a pretty secure playoff team, pending they all stay healthy. Do I see them as a top four team anymore? No, I think it's going to be close. I think they'll be closer to the 5 or 6 range. But if I'm a Warriors fan, I feel good about making the playoffs. I like my draft. I like Wiseman a lot. I even like Nico Mannion in that system as well. I don't necessarily love Mannion as a prospect, but him developing behind Steph Curry, I think is a good thing for him. And overall, Kelly Oubre is only 25 years old. So if he has a great year for this Warriors team, I don't see why they wouldn't re-sign him for maybe a longer-term deal. And there's the potential for sure.
Yeah, no, yeah, without a doubt. And in regards to Kelly Oubre, I wanted to say, Trevor, you were correct actually about his defense. He actually is, if you go off win shares, he actually is better on the defensive end in terms of win contribution than his offense, which is kind of surprising to me. Because I didn't watch a ton of Kelly Oubre, I didn't watch a ton of Suns basketball outside of the bubble, so that's kind of surprising to me. But in a good way. I mean, if he can help fill even a smidgen of what Klay Thompson had on the defensive end for the Warriors, I think that's a win for them. I want to point out one funny thing. I believe the Golden State Warriors are paying like $60 million more this year for Kelly Oubre due to them getting, I think Kelly Oubre is around a $15 million contract this year, and then also the luxury tax. So the money they're paying for Kelly Oubre is astronomical. So I mean, you really hope it pays off. I agree with you. I think they will make the playoffs. I think around a 4 or 5 seed is a good bet. I mean, this West is insane. We've talked about it numerous times. I'll say it again. It's elite. This whole conference has teams up and down it that can make the playoffs and should make the playoffs, really. But I think that with the addition of Wiseman, like you mentioned, I think that he's more raw than people want to admit. Due to the fact that he played almost no college. I mean, what did he play? 2 or 3 games. He hasn't had a lot of playing time against significant competition. So it'll be really interesting to see how he starts off the year. I think he'll start off more limited than people expect, but I expect him to become a solid player for this team, and I think Oubre is going to be good. I think they can re-sign Oubre to hopefully a similar deal to this one that he has, and I think that's a fair price for him. And he can shoot the three pretty well, 35%, and he's a solid defender, as you said, and he fits that team pretty well. So we'll see what happens, but I think they will make the playoffs. I agree with you.
You mentioned the West is stacked,
Hmm.
and you're completely right. I actually want to mention one other free agent signing. I know we haven't, it's not on
Sure.
our agenda, but
Yeah.
I think this is going to be the most underrated free agent signing of the entire cycle. This cycle,
Okay.
and that is Christian Wood going to the Houston Rockets.
Mm.
And I absolutely love this signing for the Rockets. That's exactly what they needed. Their small ball project did not work in the bubble. They got blown out by the Lakers in the second round of the playoffs. Christian Wood is a very, very nice young big man. And now I think James Harden should stay. I still think they should trade Russell Westbrook and get assets for Russell Westbrook. But I think James Harden now, if I don't even think, I think Houston's a good fit or a good place for him to stay now. He's got a big guy. They did lose Covington, which hurts a little bit, but they still have guys like Daniel House, Jeff Green, other nice 3-and-D role players. So for me, though, I wanted to mention this signing because I really, really, really like Christian Wood as a young player, and I think it's a great fit for him to go to Houston.
Yeah, Trevor, do you mind if I say one thing on that before we move on? I just
Yeah, go
wanted to
ahead.
say, I do agree with you. That's a really good signing. I think it was 3 years, $41 million, which is a pretty
Mhm.
good value. Originally, it was 27 million, and then it was said that the deal wasn't done, and he got more money. So that was kind of funny. But no, it's a fantastic signing nonetheless. He really came on strong at the end of last year for Detroit. He finally got some playing time, finally got some starters
Mhm.
minutes when Drummond was traded to Cleveland, and he showed out. He showed out, and he can run fast enough to where I think he can run with this Houston team, even if they still want to play kind of quickly. And I think they need to get rid of Westbrook. I agree. You mentioned that they failed in their small ball experiment. And I think failed is a relative term. I really think that Russell Westbrook is the key. You need to. I really think that they are better without him on the floor. I think you need to find a trade partner, even if it's a massive salary, even if you have to ship off like Westbrook for not even a lot of assets because it's such an expensive contract. I think it's worth it. Because getting Westbrook off that team, I think gives Harden more free reign. I think he's proven that he can do it, and I think it just gives him more opportunity and that team more opportunity to succeed. So we'll see if they can get rid of Westbrook. I think they should. I hope they do, but we'll see what happens. They are another definite playoff contender.
One final point on this, and I'm
Yeah,
going to go back to your point about the small ball failure. It was a failure because Houston had championship expectations and aspirations, and
sure,
getting
sure.
blown out in the second round of the playoffs. Yes, it's perspective and all relative, but for me, they did not meet their expectations with that small ball lineup and that small ball roster. I'm glad they got Christian Wood. I think that's going to be an excellent front court presence for them. But their small ball project absolutely failed. No ifs, ands, or buts. I mean,
Okay,
they got
yeah,
blown
fair.
out in the second round of the playoffs
Sure.
with two perennial All Stars and two future Hall of Famers. So
Oh yeah, I suppose. I just I really think Westbrook is just consistently overrated. So
I agree with you
yeah,
completely on
yeah.
that
So I think that that was kind of the issue there. But with that, Trevor, I think it's okay if we move on to a different topic in the NBA, which we wanted to discuss. With the NBA season upcoming, I believe it starts December 22nd with
point. Mhm.
preseason starting I think December 11th. So it's coming up fast. It's coming
Really
up really
fast.
quick. So with that, Trevor, I wanted to ask you, what's your surprise team of this year? Surprisingly good team, surprising bad team, either one.
On that point about relative and perspective and all and expectations on that,
Yeah.
I'm going to go with the Portland Trailblazers.
Okay.
And here's why. I think they might have had the best offseason of anybody. I mentioned it on the last podcast. I
Mm,
thought they had a fantastic offseason.
yep.
Robert Covington, I've already brought that name up. Love that signing. I like the Derek Jones signing. I like bringing in Enos Cantor.
Mm,
And all of a sudden, people talked about Portland not being a deep team or a malleable team. I think they're both. They can
mm,
play big, they can play small. They have athletic wing players. They re-signed Rodney Hood for bench depth, and then they still have Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, that dynamic, guard duo.
yep.
So for me, here's why I say it's a surprisingly good team. I think Portland will finish top three in the West,
Mm,
and that's high expectations. I've talked
wow.
about how good the West is,
Mm,
but I really, really like this Portland roster. I think Damian Lillard is more motivated than ever, especially after getting trounced in the playoffs last year. I'm telling you, I think Portland might have the third best roster in the West, and I think they're going to finish top three in this conference.
wow. I mean, that's definitely a bold prediction, but a lot of people, Trevor, a lot of people don't realize. I mean, Portland made the Western Conference Finals just 2 years ago. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they were there. I mean, they played the Warriors. They
And this is a
they
better team. This is
Yeah,
a better team
okay.
than that team
There you
was.
go. I mean, I think the addition of Robert Covington is really, really nice. And I think, I've always been a kind of a proponent of Hassan Whiteside. I've always said, this guy's a pretty good player. But, the more I looked into him, the more I watched him, the more problems I saw. He's more of a flashy defensive type player. He goes for the flashy blocks.
Mhm.
His motor is questioned constantly. Can he keep up, the consistent defense that he normally has or that he's supposed to have? And the answer is no. Throughout his career, and I think it continued last year, and I think Enos Kanter and Nurkic will, be able to step in and fill that role easily. So yeah, I think that you are right. I think this team can be very dangerous this year, and we'll see what happens with them. For me, I'm going to go with kind of a more under the radar team, a team that was really bad last year. I wanted to mention the Atlanta Hawks, and here for multiple reasons. We've talked about the Hawks on last week's podcast, and we said that they had some really good signings. I mentioned Chris Dunn, and I want to mention Danilo Gallinari. And I didn't really realize this because the Atlanta Hawks have some good offensive players. They have Trey
Yeah.
Young, they have John Collins, and they have Clint Capella, who's not really an offensive player per se, but he can score when needed around the basket. They had some offensive players, and I didn't realize, Trevor, they were last place in 3-point percentage last year. The Atlanta Hawks, last place, dead last, at 33%. And they went out and got a guy in Danilo Gallinari who's shot over 40% in back-to-back seasons from three-point range. So I think, I didn't really realize this signing is fantastic. And they might have overpaid a little bit, but this signing is exactly what they needed. They get that 3-point percentage up with a team as high powered an offense as they are. I think, they can easily, hit the playoffs. I think they can easily get in from a 6 to 8 seed in the East, especially because the back end of the East, as we've talked about, still isn't as strong as the West and probably won't be for quite some time. But I think they can definitely make the playoffs with this roster. Trae Young and John Collins will continue to improve, and they also got Nate McMillan. Now, this would kind of flew under the radar in the NBA news this past few weeks, but I found out they got Nate McMillan, and I think this is a fantastic signing. He is an assistant for this team now, and he has a ton of experience. I think he was one of the best. I think he was a really solid coach in the NBA. He was with an Indiana team that I think significantly overperformed its talent consistently. I think Indiana is not as good as a 4 or 5 seed as they are year after year. And yes, they don't win many playoff series. Maybe they'll win one and they'll get out. But I just think that a team like that overperforming expectations constantly, and to get the head coach from that team as your assistant on a young, growing team like the Hawks, I think it's a really fantastic signing, and I think that's really going to help. Him and Rajon Rondo are both going to be really nice coaching veteran presences for this basketball team. So I think this team has a lot of potential this year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything with what you just said. One point on the Hawks, real quick. They struggled from the 3 point line as a team, and they also struggled defensively as a team.
Yeah.
And I think bringing in guys like Rajon Rondo and Chris Dunn, who are more defensive type guards who can get steals and are lockdown type defenders,
Yep.
I think will help out this Hawks team a lot. They're not going to be the cornerstone pieces of this team, but defense matters, especially come playoff time. And I think for the Atlanta Hawks, a playoff, I think they should have playoff expectations. This is a good enough roster now
Mm-hmm.
and that coaching staff that this team should expect to be, as you said, a 6 to 8 seed in the East. They're probably, in my opinion, a year away from really making some noise, but I do agree they'll be a bottom end playoff team this year.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I agree with that. And Trevor, do you want to tell us a team that you think's gonna underperform expectations this year? A
I
team you think
do,
is a little
yes.
overrated?
I do. And I'm going to go with the New Orleans Pelicans, and here's why.
Wow.
I did not like the firing of Alvin Gentry. For me, that did not make much sense.
Hmm.
I like Alvin Gentry as a coach. I like him as a player motivator. So for me, didn't really understand that very much. Number two, they gave up this team, I should say New Orleans struggles as a defensive team already, right? They're not a great defensive team. They gave up their best on-ball defender in Drew Holiday. And they didn't give him up, but he's not there anymore. For me, Drew Holiday was probably their best player, their best defender, maybe their best player last year. And that's a huge loss for them. Number two, Derek Favors is also, in my opinion, a pretty big loss for this team. He's that front court presence that, they don't really have that strong of a front court as is. Jackson Hayes is a very young and developing center. Zion's a little bit of an undersized big man, but you could say he's in the front court. But I do think losing Derek Favors hurts that team a lot. I know they signed Steven Adams and they did get Eric Bledsoe.
Hmm.
But for me, I don't like Eric Bledsoe as a team player all that much, and I don't think he's as good of a defender. I like Steven Adams, but he's not all that much better if he's even better than Derek Favors. I would expect the New Orleans Pelicans to find themselves in the lottery next draft time or
Wow.
around next draft class. I like Zion, but we'll see how Zion develops. He really needs to get in, he needs to get his weight a little bit under control. He needs to be able to shoot the ball a little bit more.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm just not high on this New Orleans team. I don't like losing Drew Holiday. I don't like firing Alvin Gentry. They have some nice young pieces, as I said, but again, the West is loaded. And for me, this team is a lottery team.
Interesting. Wow. I mean, listen, like that's definitely a fair argument, and I do want to point out, I do agree that the Drew Holiday trade hurts them definitely in the short term, but I believe they got at least 2 first-round picks for that.
I
So,
agree.
yeah, but down the road it'll help them. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, right now this team, I think that really hurts them. I really think it does. And you're talking about Zion, and I want to make one point before I go on to my team that I think is a little overrated and is going to underperform this year. Zion, to me, there was a lot of media hype. Of course there was. But looking at Zion, he really lacked in defensive plays in the NBA in his first season, and it was kind of surprising to me. And you saw him at Duke, making crazy blocks and being a consistently strong defender. And you see him in the NBA, and I know these are bigger bodies and they move quicker and they're just stronger and faster. But he didn't. I don't know. I believe he averaged like a third of a block a game, or like a fifth of a block per game. He didn't have a lot of blocks. And defensive statistically wise, he was barely a plus defender. I think he might have even been a negative defender. So the guy, he really underperformed the defensive end for me. I need to see an improvement there, and I need to see an improvement on. Really, I want to see him become a better passer. That's what I want to see. I don't really ever think he'll become a solid jump shooter. I think if he can become a solid passer with his inside game, I think he'll be a really, really, really good player. But, you made a good point with this Pelicans team. I think firing a head coach destabilizes a young organization and it creates problems inside the culture. So you
I
have a
want to
good
make
point there.
one quick point on the Pelicans.
Yeah, of course.
I want to blame the organization and Gentry a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I do defend Al Gentry as a head coach, but I don't defend how much they protected Zion Williamson
Mm,
last year. They overprotected him.
without a
They
doubt.
limited his minutes way too much. He was never able to get into a rhythm.
Yep.
And for me, look, he's a rookie. He's 19 years old. There's going to be growing pains on the offensive and defensive end, but you got to let the guy play. If you don't let him play, he can't grow. So I do blame the Pelicans as an organization for that a little bit. We'll see if that changes this year.
Yep.
Um, but I agree with a lot of what you just said. He's not a great defender. And yeah, I'll stick to it. This is going to be a lottery team. The West is loaded.
Yeah.
So
I
Ryan, I'll
mean,
toss it to you.
someone has to miss the playoffs. You're right, and
Right.
yeah,
I'll
with that,
toss it to you,
I want to talk
Ryan.
about another team that I think is
Yeah.
overrated, and that's the Denver Nuggets. And people might be surprised
Oh,
by this
wow.
because the Denver Nuggets, they did make a kind of a magical run to the Western Conference Finals, almost made it to the NBA Finals. But I think that people aren't talking about the losses this team endured, the last few weeks. They lost a lot of players. They lost Torrey Craig, they lost Mason Plumlee, and they lost Jeremy Grant. All three of these players aren't just, back end bench players. These players are solid players who got solid rotational minutes on this team. Jeremy Grant, I believe, was even a starter, and he was their number one defender on the Paul Georges of the world, right? The LeBron Jameses. He was primarily the guy who would go up against them. I mean, you can't put Jamal Murray on LeBron James. And now you don't even have Torrey Craig at small forward to, get in there for Jeremy Grant. They're both gone. The only guy they were able to keep was an aging Paul Millsap, who, sure, that's nice, but I worry about this team's second unit. I don't know what's there. I mean, Bol Bol's going to get more minutes now that Plumlee is gone. I don't know if that's. I don't think it's going to help him in the short term. Bol Bol could develop into a good player, but he's extremely raw. I mean, we all know that. I worry about this team. Being able to put together four strong quarters, especially in a season where we talked about it, the wear and tear on Jamal Murray and Jokic was unbelievable in the bubble, and they're coming out and they're playing, on a really short offseason. Really short offseason. They're coming out and training camp starts today. I mean, they're back. Like it was a short offseason, so I just think that the combination of that, the combination of the losses they had in free agency, and just because the West is so strong, I would expect the Nuggets to be a back end playoff team and not where they were this past season, which was, I believe, Trevor, was it the 2 seed? I believe it was, or the 3 seed. It was somewhere around there.
Denver last year,
Yeah,
they
no,
were the 3 seed.
yeah, they were. Okay, yeah. So I would expect them to be down in the 6, 7, or even 8 seeds.
Wow.
I just think that the bench is an underrated part of an NBA team, and I think they're really going to struggle without these key defenders and rotational players. I really do.
I'm going to push back on your Denver a little bit. I think Denver will be top six, and
Okay,
I honestly think they'll be 4 or 5 in the West.
interesting.
If I had to go top four right now, I'd probably go Lakers, Clippers, Portland, Denver, and then maybe
Wow,
Golden State at 5.
I'd go Utah over Denver, 100%.
I don't know. Here's the thing about Denver, and I think it's Denver's success, in my opinion, is going to be very dependent on the development of Michael Porter Jr.
That's
Because
100%.
third guy. You know what you get out of Jokic and Murray, two All Stars, and we started to see what MPJ could do for this team in the bubble last year. If he continues to develop, I think they can afford a little bit of a loss at bench depth. I also think they got a nice, rotational player in JaMychal Green to replace a Torrey Craig or Jeremy Grant. I don't think he's as good as either of them, but I think he's at least a little bit of bench depth that you can bring off the bench. For me, Mason Plumlee was never that important, anyways. I still think this Denver roster is really, really good. Jokic is elite, Murray is elite, and if Michael Porter Jr. develops the way I think he will develop, they have three really, really, all-star caliber players. So for me, Denver, I don't know if Denver will be a 3 seed this year, but I think Denver will be in the top 5.
Okay, I mean that's definitely fair. I mean they have some really good talent. I just worry also if you want to reference Michael Porter Jr. I worry what they did to him in the bubble, and I know he played well, but I worry that they're using him in the wrong way. They're not getting him the ball enough. I mean the guys you watch Jamal Murray and Jokic, they run a two-man game. They run a two-man pick and roll. That's
Sure.
primarily what they do, and Porter Jr. stands there on the wing hoping to get a three. He doesn't take many shots. In the bubble, he would have some games, Trevor, where he'd have 3 or 4 shots the entire game.
I think that will change.
you
I
you
think that will
you
change.
gotta get him more. You gotta get him more shots. And I
I think,
guess
yeah. No, I
I
think
guess
Mike Malone is a good enough coach. I think that will change.
okay.
I just think the problem was Jokic and Murray were playing so well as a two-man game. It was hard to go away from it. And look where it got you. It got you to the Western Conference Finals. It's hard to go away from what's working. But I do agree. Over the course of a 72 game season and the next playoff run, Denver's going to need to get guys like Michael Porter Jr. and Gary Harris and Paul Millsap more involved in the offense. That way, you keep the defenses honest, and you have more weapons that the defense has to respect. So, good
Yeah.
point there.
All right. Yeah. No, that's fair. Um, but with that, Trevor, I think that just about does it for our NBA discussion, and I think that we can move on to the other sport, the NFL, where there was again, a full weekend of games,
Mm-hmm.
barring the
Still have another game this week.
barring the Steelers Ravens game, which we're not going to get into too much, but I feel like that was kind of unfairly pushed to Wednesday when they could have played tonight on Tuesday. But that's neither here nor there. With that, Trevor, I wanted to kick it off by asking you, what game do you want to talk about from this past weekend?
I want to talk about the Tennessee Indianapolis game,
Mm, okay.
and I'm going to make a case for Derrick Henry to be in the MVP discussion and Mike Vrabel to be Coach of the Year. I've
Wow.
had some bold MVP candidates on this
Sheesh.
podcast.
Yes, you
I'm going to have to
have.
move away from Kyler Murray for a little bit on the MVP discussion this year. But look, man, Derrick Henry is not human. I don't know what he is. He might be an alien, cyborg, Superman. He's something, but he's not human. The way Tennessee runs him every game, 25 carries, 30
Hmm.
carries,
Yep.
the guy's special. He's an unbelievable running back. He will probably win the rushing title again this year. He went for 180 yards and 3 touchdowns on Sunday against the Colts, and most of that, by the way, was in the first half. I believe he had 140 and 3 touchdowns at halftime.
Mm,
Just goes to show how unstoppable he was. And look, I think Tennessee's going to go on to win this division. I still like Indianapolis. I think Indianapolis will get a wild card spot. Philip Rivers for me is inconsistent. That defense was not very good on Sunday. But yeah, I just want to highlight how good of a job Derrick Henry has done this year for this Tennessee team. He is an elite player in this league.
yes, he is.
And I'm going to throw Mike Vrabel's name into the early Coach of the Year discussion.
Wow. I mean, listen, you can throw Vrabel's name into the Coach of the Year discussion. That's fair. But I do want to say, I think that we all expected Tennessee to improve this year. I really do. I think the addition of Jadeveon Clowney, they kept all their, solid offensive pieces. A.J. Brown with another year of development. He's becoming an elite receiver alongside DK Metcalf. I mean, these guys, DK's getting all the spotlight in the media, but A.J. Brown is playing very, very well for the Titans. I mean, he, just this past week had 100 yards and a touchdown, a 70-yard touchdown catch against the Colts. I mean, another big game. He was injured in the middle of the season, missed a few games, but he's still, I think, he's well on his way to being a top 15 receiver in this league easily, if he's not already there. But
Mm-hmm.
in regards to Derrick Henry, he's elite, no question about it. I mean, there's no question about it. The guy's special. 27 carries, 178 yards, 6.6 yards per carry. I mean, that's unbelievable, and he's been doing it for what, 3 years now, I guess. 3 years, for almost 3 seasons. He came onto the scene 2.5 seasons ago, and he really hasn't looked back. I mean, he starts off every season slow. This year he started off slow. Would he be the same? Yes, he's the same. He always turns on the Jets in November and December, and he's going to lead them to the playoffs once again. They'll be a formidable team. I mean, they were a formidable team last year in the playoffs, and they were going to be a formidable team this year. Ryan Tannehill is a good quarterback, not a great quarterback, but he gets the job done, makes throws when he needs to, and relies on his running back and doesn't do too much. And I really like this team, and I really like Vrabel because again, the mark of a good coach to me is consistency and masking your team's weaknesses, and he does that really well. And I think that he's done a really good job developing the culture of this team. It seems like they have a really good uh, group of guys who work really well together. So you can throw his name in the coach of the year discussion. I think that there are other coaches who could easily win coach of the year as well, but Vrabel's definitely in there. For me, I mean, Trevor, do you have any final words you want to say about the Tennessee game before we move on? I don't know
No,
if you.
I agree. Tennessee is
Yeah.
it's weird. Tennessee's one of those teams that doesn't surprise you. You know what they're going to do, and
Yeah.
they
Yep.
and I think that is a testament to their coaching, where they're able to execute a game plan that everybody plans for. So
Yep. I actually do want to say one last thing before we move on. And I wanted to talk about the Colts in this game because we didn't really talk about them. For the Colts, for me, they're still a really good team. I think, I mentioned this over the weekend, outside of the podcast, but I think that, the Colts are a team that need their lines to be healthy.
mhm.
And some people say, well, the Titans were as injured as the Colts. Well, I think that for a team like the Titans, I think they have more skill position talent than a team like the Colts. The Colts rely heavily on their elite offensive line and their, top five defense this year. And I think when you have people like DeForest Buckner and two starting linemen, offensive linemen out, I think it makes it difficult to win the battles in the trenches. And when a team like the Colts lose the battle in the trenches, it's tough to win games because you don't have elite guys at the receiver position. You don't have elite guys at the running back position like the Titans do, and you don't have an elite quarterback. Philip Rivers just isn't that quarterback, anymore. He's a slightly above average quarterback who is trying to push a team, over the top into the playoffs. And so, I think that this was kind of expected, a loss, maybe not by this much, but you can expect a loss when this team is injured at the lines. And I think if they want to make any noise going into the playoffs, they need to get those lines healthy. So,
Couldn't agree more. I think it's a
yeah,
good way to close out that game there. Ryan,
yeah.
I know you have a couple games you want to mention, so go ahead and talk to us about your first game on the list.
I do. And Trevor's gonna laugh. I didn't talk about this team last week, but I had to bring them up this week. We just can't ignore them any longer. The Cleveland Browns are 8-3 in this league. This is the first season where they won't have a losing record since 2007. And it's a team, Trevor, that honestly, they're going to make the playoffs, barring a catastrophe. Two of their remaining games are against the Jets and the Giants, so they're albeit guaranteed a 10-win season. And they play the Titans next week, and they also play the Ravens and the Steelers to close out the season. So, I really think that this team is going to make the playoffs, and I think that this team probably, will they win a playoff game? I don't know. But I love what I see from the offense. I really do. And I want to start off with the good because Nick Chubb is fantastic. Nick Chubb is, he's an elite running back. We're talking about Derrick Henry being elite. I want to throw Nick Chubb up there with all those other elite running backs with Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. He needs to be up there with them. He needs to be. The guy has single-handedly made this team better on his own. Without him, the Cleveland Browns were 25th in rushing offense. They average, I believe, 95 rush yards a game. With Nick Chubb, they vaulted back into first place in rushing on the season as a team. They had over 200 yards rushing, I believe, this past weekend or around there, and they average about 195 rush yards a game when Chubb is healthy. So an extra 100 yards when Chubb is healthy. I just think that he's such a difference maker for this team. Takes pressure off Baker, takes pressure off Kareem, which is necessary. Which really is necessary. This team needs to spread the ball around, and that's what they do. Baker makes throws when he needs to. And Baker, I'm just gonna say one thing. He's played pretty well this year. He hasn't turned the ball over in a month. His QBR, I believe, is second in the division, behind Ben Roethlisberger. And he had a QBR of 89 this past week. He was 19 for 29, 260 yards and two touchdowns, no interceptions and no fumbles. He had a solid game. And that's what he has to do. That's what he has to continue to do. And I will say, though, he needs to hit consistently on the easy throws. He missed two or three really easy throws on Sunday. If the Browns want to win a playoff game, he needs to hit those throws. You can't be missing those throws as a playoff quarterback, and he has to hit those. But outside of that, I love the offense. And I'll turn it over to you, Trevor, because I talked a lot on this game. But if you want to say anything, go right ahead.
I don't have much to say. This was another unimpressive victory. As I've said, I've probably said this on every podcast since this NFL season started. The Browns win with their running backs. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt carry this team. It was evident on Sunday. If Nick Chubb wasn't playing, this team would have lost to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I do want to highlight Nick Chubb because he's an unbelievable running back. I underestimated him. I didn't realize how good he was. He's fantastic. Baker to me, he was all right. I mean, he made some throws. He didn't make any mistakes. I think that's a fair point to bring up. He didn't make any mistakes.
Yeah.
He did miss two or three really easy throws, which he does pretty much every game. But that's what I expect with Baker Mayfield. He's going to miss throws. He's not that good. I've never been high on Baker Mayfield. And I'm going to wrap this up and just be like, look, you barely scratched out a win against the Jacksonville Jaguars. You're not going to be a losing team this year. Congratulations. Have fun being the 7 seed and playing the Kansas City Chiefs in the wild card and losing by 40 points.
Wow, wow, he is really disrespecting the Browns. I do want to point out, Trevor, that the Browns were missing two all-pro defenders on Sunday. They were missing
Okay,
probably
okay, come on.
probably the
Who
defensive
are,
player in the year in Myles Garrett and an all-pro corner in Denzel Ward, who has the most passes defensed on the season out of any cornerback in the
I
NFL.
agree, but who are we? You're playing the Jaguars. There's
Oh,
no pro player anywhere on that team.
I don't disagree. The defense is terrible. The defense has some massive holes and it needs to be fixed. The offense, I think, is okay. The defense needs to be fixed. The linebacking core is the worst in the NFL. The D line needs to step up and play better, and the safeties are just abysmal. Grant Delpit tore his Achilles before the season, and that hurt us ever since.
I want to say one final thing on the
Sure.
Browns. If we're going based purely on record, the Cleveland Browns are the most overrated team in the NFL. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Wow. I'm just gonna okay. Then I'll say one last thing. To give two different opinions here. I think it's unfair to say that the Browns are the most overrated team in the NFL just
I
solely
think it's
because.
completely fair.
Sorry.
I think it's completely fair to say that.
Well, only because you're judging that off of two games. You're judging that off of the two losses early in the season, one to the Ravens, which it was the first game under a new head coach, and then against the Steelers where Baker Mayfield was hurt, and the team just played terrible. The team just played terrible, and the Steelers are undefeated. I'll just point out they're 10-0. So I feel like losing to that team isn't the worst thing in the world, and I think the mark of a maybe not a good team, but a solid, respectable team is beating teams that you're supposed to beat, not losing to teams that you're supposed to beat. And
I agree with
I'm
that.
just gonna, we can move on to your next game, Trevor, which is the Arizona Cardinals and New England Patriots,
Good point.
and we can talk about
It's a good game.
How the
It's a good
Arizona
game.
Cardinals lost to a team that they were supposed to beat. And again, I think that that's a problem, and I think that that's something the Browns haven't done this year, and I think the Cardinals need to work on. So, Trevor, do we want to get into this Cardinals and Patriots game? What do you think? What
Uh,
happened?
I'm living in Spain, but the S is silent. I'm rooting for the Cardinals right now. You're
uh,
exactly right. This was a game that the Cardinals should have won, and we outplayed New England badly. Cam Newton, 84 passing yards, nine
sheesh,
completions, two interceptions,
unbelievable.
and we somehow found a way to lose this football game.
Wow.
For me, the turning point was it was 10-7, and the very last play of the first half was a 4th and goal from the 1 yard line. And you can argue if Kenyon Drake got in or not. It was impossible to tell. They went with the call on the field. But for me, Kenyon Drake getting stuffed at the 1 yard line completely changed the game. If he gets in, that's a 17-7 ball game at halftime. The
Mm.
Cardinals get the ball to start the second half and probably win this football game relatively easily. But, you know, it didn't work out like that. I believe Kyler threw an interception early in the third quarter. They went down the field and scored a touchdown. I don't even know what to say about Zane Gonzalez other than I want him gone. I
Wow.
want him out of my city, out of my state. I don't want him wearing an Arizona Cardinals uniform next year.
Mm.
He has missed too many field goals in clutch moments. Missed one against Seattle. Luckily, made the second one he got. Left one short against Miami. Don't know how you do that. And then shanked one to the right against New England um, on this
Oh
past
man.
Sunday. And I do want to make one final point.
Mhm.
I don't know if you remember the play. Isaiah Simmons gets called for a 15-yard unnecessary roughness penalty, which basically put New England in field goal range to give them the game-winning field goal. For me, it wasn't a late hit. Cam Newton was on green grass, so if they called it a late hit, I think it was a terrible call. Was it a helmet-to-helmet hit? I guess you could say that. For me, that's just a young player making a young mistake. He should have just not put the ref in a position to make that call.
Yeah.
You could argue it cost us the game. I'm going to argue that Zane Gonzalez and our lack of ability to execute cost us the game.
Mm.
But I wanted to highlight that because young players are going to make young mistakes like that, and I don't think Isaiah Simmons should be blamed for this loss. But I'll hand it to
All
you. Give
right,
you.
yeah, I mean that this kind of extends into, a kind of a different problem I have with the NFL as a whole, and I want to talk about this real quick before I address this game. And I think that the penalties the defenders receive for hitting the quarterback have become unfair to the defenders. I really do, and I think that a lot of these ticky-tack penalties where the defender hits the quarterback with like his side of his arm as he's hitting him as the quarterback is releasing the football, and they throw a 15-yard penalty flag because he's hitting in the head or neck area. But in reality, it should be more of a judgment call because if you look at it, it's not hurting the quarterback's head in any way when his
It's not.
arm
It's
is
not putting him at risk
exactly.
of
It's not
concussion.
putting him at any harm. So my thing is I think it should be made a subjective judgment call on like if it's a brutal helmet to helmet collision, of course throw the flag. But I mean I think that a lot of these, yeah, and also these late hits as well. They're late hits. I think a lot of them are very, very borderline. Going back to a few seasons ago, last season and the season before that, there have been hits that have been questionable. In terms of should they have thrown a flag on that? I would think not. I tend to think less penalties in a game is better for the league. And I just don't like all the penalties they're throwing for hitting the quarterbacks. I think it puts defenders in a very tough spot. So I just want to get that out there. But talking about this game, Trevor, I look at these statistics, and if I'm just looking at the stats, the Cardinals outplayed the Patriots in nearly every single category.
Completely agree.
They had more plays. They had more time of possession. They won the turnover battle. They had more rush yards. They had more passing yards. It's unbelievable to me. They outplayed them in nearly every facet of the game. They had more first downs. I mean, this was just like a domination in terms of statistical categories for the Arizona Cardinals, and that they still lost this game. And to me, again, I'm just going to say it. This is a mark of a young, inexperienced team. And this is the difference between the Browns and the Cardinals. You can laugh at it all you want, but a team like that who, a team who is young and just and makes young rookie mistakes like Isaiah Simmons did. However, even if the call was bad, just to put the ref in that position, like you said, a
Mm-hmm.
15-yard penalty in that position is critical. It's critical. And with a guy like Cam Newton who threw for under 100 passing yards and 2 picks in this game, I mean, if he doesn't throw that flag, I mean, who knows what happens? I mean, Cam Newton was unsuccessful throwing the ball all day. I mean, he made Drake Kirkpatrick look like an elite corner. I'm going to be honest.
He
Uh,
did.
so, so I just think it's inexperience and rookie mistakes that was the downfall of the Cardinals. This past Sunday, and Zane Gonzalez, you're right, is a big problem. Special teams is a massive part of NFL teams, and a lot of people kind of look at the offense and defense only, but special teams is a major, major, major component of a successful NFL team. It's why the Patriots were so good for so long. Bill Belichick harped on special teams. They're one of the best special teams in the NFL, and they have been for over a decade. Arizona Cardinals just got to clean up their game. Less crucial turnovers, less crucial penalties, and just better execution all around. That's all. Uh,
I
you
want
know,
to make one final point on the play calling.
sure.
Uh, for me, if you and this is I'm not a genius when it comes to reading defenses, but if DeAndre Hopkins has a one-on-one matchup, and if Kyler Murray and
Mm,
Cliff Kingsbury, are communicating, and it looks like DeAndre has one-on-one,
yeah.
DeAndre Hopkins needs 12, 15 targets a game. He should not be only having 5 catches for 51 yards. And also, this has been a trend the last 2 or 3 games. Kyler Murray has not ran as much as I would have liked.
Mm,
I get it. He got hurt against Seattle, his shoulder. He's probably a little bit worried right now to take off. He doesn't want to aggravate that injury.
mm,
But for me, what made Kyler Murray so dangerous was his ability to run and his ability to break plays open, especially when the play turns into, a broken play per se. And the fact that he's not running as much is a little concerning. They're not throwing the ball to Hopkins as much as we saw early in the season. So I think we need to get back to what we were doing the first few games of the year is targeting Hopkins an overwhelming amount. And Kyler Murray needs to be, not afraid to run, but just be smart, not take unnecessary hits, slide when you have to,
yeah.
and and maybe give Kenyon Drake a few less carries because Kenyon Drake has just been so unimpressive this year. He should not be getting the ball 22 times. I think he should be getting 15 carries a game, give Edmonds 7 or 8, and then let Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins eat.
There you go. I mean, getting the ball to your best players is a recipe for success. It's simple as that. So, if they can get the ball to DeAndre when he's one-on-one, get it to him when he's one-on-one. So, Trevor, with that, I think we can move on from this game, see if the Cardinals can bounce back next week. And I wanted to move on to another really interesting game, a game that looked like a blowout at the start, and it was pulled back to a close game at the last second, where, between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it looked like the Buccaneers might be able to have a last-minute drive, but Mahomes was able to throw a first down conversion pass to Tyreek Hill, none other than Tyreek Hill, the guy who, just made them look silly all game. I mean, 200 receiving yards in the first quarter. What is going on here? It was unbelievable. It made them look ridiculous. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Carlton Davis was on him for most of that first half, and Carlton Davis is a good corner. He's a good corner. But going into this game, I was like, you know what? Maybe Carlton Davis could be voted to the Pro Bowl. I actually like Carlton Davis. I think he's a solid corner. But he got absolutely toasted in this game. And the reality is it's because the Buccaneers had no answer. They had absolutely no answer. Tyreek Hill was a one-on-one with Carlton Davis. You cannot leave a corner one-on-one with Tyreek Hill past 10 yards. You have to have safety help over the top. And Mahomes looked off the safety multiple times, and the safety bit on it, and that's why the safety wasn't there in time to help the corner on a bunch of those deep routes. And this extends to a bigger thing for both teams. I'm really worried about the Buccaneers, not even to make the playoffs necessarily, but I think that'll be tough now. But in the playoffs, I thought they'd be a Super Bowl contender. I thought they could win the Super Bowl. Outside the Chiefs, I was like, the Buccaneers could do it. But watching this game, the score is closer than what it actually was, Trevor. I mean, it was a 3-point score, but the game was not that. It didn't feel that close for the vast majority of that game. And I think the Buccaneers need to do a lot of reflecting, particularly on the offensive end. I've heard some good points, and I want to point one out. The Buccaneers offense is kind of stuck between two different things. It's stuck between an offense that wants to just go, 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 throw the ball deep, have a lot of gunslinging, to Brady, just unleashing it to AB and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Just throw, throw, throw. And it's also stuck between a slow, more methodical, run heavy, two tight end set, offense that methodically marches down the field. And Bruce Arians needs to get it together. He needs to. I think this falls on Bruce Arians, truly. He's putting Brady in a bad spot. You need to play to your quarterback's strengths, and Brady's strengths are not throwing it deep all game. It's not doing that. It's throwing the ball over the middle to Rob Gronkowski and Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown, and having long, sustained drives like he did in New England, and running the ball when necessary with Ronald Jones, and you're going to have a recipe for success. I think this team does not have an identity on offense, and it's concerning, and I think they need to fix it this week with their bye week.
I think that's a great point about not having an offensive identity.
Yeah.
You're totally right. They have so many playmakers. You would think that it's a good thing,
Mm.
but in reality, it might almost be a bad thing. I think they have too many. I think they have too many mouths to feed, as
Yeah.
the old adage goes.
Mm.
I mean, you have Mike Evans, Godwin, Antonio Brown, Gronkowski, Leonard Fournette, Ronald Jones, and for me, it's like you're right. It leads to an identity issue. What do you want to do offensively? And this does fall on Bruce Arians. And I think the best way to fix your offensive identity is figuring out what your most important player does best. And your most important player is Tom Brady. And you brought it up. Tom Brady loves play action over the middle, loves those crossing routes to his shorter receivers in New England. Tom Brady doesn't rely on
Mm.
throwing the ball deep to big receivers because he's never had a big receiver
Yeah.
other than Randy Moss, which was almost maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah, a long time
I
ago.
completely agree with you on that point. They have a huge identity issue on offense. I think their defense is also a little overrated. I do like their front seven a lot. I think they can get after the quarterback, and they're very good against the run. But their secondary needs some work, and their secondary is young. Antoine Winfield's a rookie safety.
Mhm.
Carlton Davis, I don't know if he's a rookie, but he's a
I
young
believe he's his
corner,
second or third year out of Auburn. Yeah.
second or third year. Jamel Dean is their second corner. He is also relatively young. So
Yep.
their secondary is young and improving. I think we saw a few really good games out of the secondary and wanted to crown them the next elite Legion of Boom. But they're having some growing pains, and that's what's going to happen. I still think they have an elite front seven. I like Todd Bowles on the defensive end, calling plays. But you're totally right. I think Bruce Arians should get the lion's share of the blame. He needs to be able to, and I'm going to repeat myself, he just needs to be able to utilize Brady in the right way.
Yep.
Play to Brady's strengths, and I think this will be much improved for their next performance, their next game.
Yeah, 100%. And before I move on, I want to say one last thing. This is kind of neither here nor there, but I just wanted to say I never understand why these elite teams, both the Buccaneers and the Chiefs, do have these strange signings. Like the Chiefs signed Le'Veon Bell for the rest of the season.
I don't get it.
The Buccaneers signed Leonard Fournette, and I don't
And
understand.
Antonio Brown, in my opinion, I don't get the Antonio Brown.
Yeah, well, yeah, particularly, it's just like you're not utilizing them you're not utilizing them as much as you need to if you're going to sign a guy like that. Leonard Fournette's a guy that needs the ball 20 times a game to be really effective. Leonard Fournette's not a guy that you throw in for 10 snaps a game, gets 4 touches, and is insanely effective. And it's shown back to back, like in weeks all season, except for week 2, where he had over 100 rush yards against the Panthers. He really hasn't done anything. I mean, he hasn't done anything. Ronald Jones has thoroughly outplayed him. Same with the Chiefs. Le'Veon Bell getting 5 or 6 touches a game. All he does is eat away at Clyde Edwards-Helaire's touches, a young rookie who I think should get all the touches he wants, and a guy who's proven himself. And Le'Veon Bell just comes in and interrupts his flow. You want a running back to stay in there, get in the zone, get in a kind of, flow with the game, the game plan, and, get into the game. And I think when you're constantly being taken out like that, it's tough. And I think that, these signings just, my point is, the signings just kind of confused me, and I don't think they were necessary. I think you just give the snaps to your young players who have proven to be playmakers and have explosive plays, and you let them develop as the season goes on. Yeah.
Totally agree with everything you just said there.
Yeah. So, I think, Trevor, we can move on from that. And we have, I believe, one final game, Trevor, if you don't mind. And that is the game from just, I believe, on Sunday night, 2 nights ago, the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers. Now, I want to talk about this game for just the sole reason of talking about really the Chicago Bears. And to me, this is a strange team. Trevor, this team started off 5-1 this year. 5-1. Like, they were the 1 seed in the NFC a few months ago, and now look at them. They have lost, I believe it is, 5 straight. They're 5-6 now. I mean, this team is this team is a mess. I think they'll miss the playoffs. I really don't know what's going on. I think it shows that, this offense is just abysmal. It is just abysmal. It is really, really bad. David Montgomery is overrated, in my opinion. He had one really good run against the Packers on Sunday night, but I think week after week he's shown to be a guy who lacks explosiveness and consistency. He doesn't, he doesn't break a lot of tackles. He doesn't get the extra couple yards that a lot of these elite running backs do. He averaged, I believe, under 3.7 or 3.8 yards per carry. It's just not good enough in this league. So that's a problem. And the other problem is Allen Robinson is a free agent at the end of the season. You think Allen Robinson's going to stay in this offense? You think Allen Robinson is going to stay with Mitch Trubisky and Nick Foles? No, he's not going to stay. There have even been reports of him liking tweets and Instagram posts with Allen Robinson going to different teams. Allen Robinson, he's done with the Bears. And if he leaves the Bears, when he leaves the Bears, this team has nothing. It has a Tariq Cohen, Mitch Trubisky, and Darnell Mooney. Like, this team really, really needs offensive weapons. They desperately need it. The defense can't handle the stress. I mean, clearly, the Packers put a 41 on them in 3 quarters. And they didn't really try in the fourth, and Chicago got a ton of garbage time points and stats. And I think it's a problem. Their defense is solid. It's a good defense. They just need offensive weapons, and this team lacks them, and that's why they're going to miss the playoffs this year, and Allen Robinson's going to leave.
I'm going to go quickly on this one. If I'm the Bears, I'm blowing up the offense. I'm getting rid of Trubisky. I'm getting rid of everybody, and I'm rebuilding that offense.
Yeah.
Because that defense is good. I mean, they arguably have the best defensive player in the NFL in Khalil Mack on that team. Maybe Aaron Donald's probably better.
Yeah.
Khalil Mack's a top 3 defensive player in the entire NFL.
Yep.
And that front 7 for Chicago is really, really, really good. The secondary hasn't been as good this year, but I still believe that front 7 is really good for Chicago. I want to talk about Aaron Rodgers. He's brilliant. He's fantastic. I haven't necessarily disrespected him on this podcast, but I've maybe elevated other guys above him falsely. So I will say Aaron Rodgers is probably back into second place in the MVP.
There you go.
I even think he's a little bit ahead of Russell Wilson. Aaron Rodgers was fantastic. But the Bears just they drafted Trubisky and they got it wrong. It's as simple as that. They traded up in the draft. They passed on Mahomes. They passed on Deshaun Watson, and they made a mistake. And you know what? Mistakes happen. Trubisky just hasn't worked. It's time to move on from him, and it's time to figure out a new quarterback situation. I don't think Matt Nagy should be fired. I like Matt Nagy as a coach. I think he's a nice offensive play designer. But no play designer can fix Mitch Trubisky. He's just not it for me. Just not it. It's as simple as that. I would try and get a Sam Darnold, maybe draft a quarterback, do something, but you got to fix the quarterback position because, in my opinion, if they keep Allen Robinson, this is a playoff team with a decent quarterback. I mean, if they bring in a Phillip Rivers, or a Sam Darnold, in my opinion. I'm a little bit higher on
Oh
Sam
my
Darnold than other people. But some other quarterback that has potential or who has proven himself, I think the Chicago team's a playoff team.
All right, yeah, I mean there there we go. Wow. I mean we'll see what happens with the Bears. I think they're lost and without direction, but we'll see if they can right the ship this offseason or later this season. But Trevor, I think that just about does it, right? I think that just about covers it for this week's
I got
podcast.
nothing else to say. I
Uh,
love this podcast. I out argued Ryan. Yeah, it's been
You
fun.
know, we can let Trevor believe his delusions. It's okay. We all know that the Cleveland Browns are not the most overrated team in the NFL, and they're going to make the playoffs, and they're going to break the streak that they've held since 2003, and we'll see where that goes. Kevin Stefanski, Coach of the Year candidate, and we'll see where that ends up. But with that, we're going to end this podcast, and we hope everyone enjoys, and we will be back next week with a new podcast, podcast number 30. Hit the number 30 mark. So we'll see you next week.
Woohoo! Something to celebrate.